Roaring Harley-Davidsons shook the hospital's concrete foundation as 97 Hell's Angels arrived in the dead of night. This wasn't an intimidation tactic. It was a desperate rescue mission. Inside, a terrified little girl hid from a monster in a tailored suit. What these bikers did next will completely shock you. The fluorescent lights of the St. Jude's Medical Center pediatric ward hummed with a sterile, unforgiving buzz. It was 2:14 a.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday in Seattle, the kind of night where the cold seeped straight into your bones. In room 4, 8-year-old Chloe Holden lay entirely still, her small frame swallowed by the crisp white hospital sheets. Her left arm was encased in a heavy plaster cast, and a mosaic of deep purple and yellow bruises painted the right side of her pale face. Standing at the foot of her bed, speaking in hushed velvet tones to the attending physician, was her stepfather, Richard Sterling. Richard was a man who wore his wealth like a suit of armor. He was a prominent real estate developer, a major donor to the hospital's charity wing, and a man whose tailored Italian suits never seemed to wrinkle, even after a midnight rush to the emergency room. I just turned my back for a second. "Doctor Gallagher." Richard sighed, running a perfectly manicured hand through his silver-streaked hair. His voice cracked with a masterful imitation of a distraught parent. She was trying to reach a book on the top shelf of her bookcase. The whole thing tipped. I caught it before it could crush her. But she took a terrible fall against the oak railing. Dr. Aris Gallagher, a seasoned pediatrician who had seen enough broken bones to know the difference between a tragic accident and a deliberate strike, kept his expression neutral. The bruising on Chloe's ribs were shaped suspiciously like the blunt toe of a dress shoe. The defensive fractures on her forearms told a story of a child trying to shield her face, not a child tumbling from a bookcase. "We'll need to keep her for observation. Mr. Sterling." "Doctor," Gallagher said smoothly, though his jaw was tight. "Standard protocol for a concussion of this grade. We also need to run a routine check with Child Protective Services. It's the law for injuries like this." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Richard's warm, sorrowful eyes hardened into chips of flint. "I understand, Doctor. But as a board member of this hospital, I assure you, my lawyers will make any routine checks very difficult for your administration. Chloe is fragile. She lost her mother 6 months ago. She doesn't need bureaucrats interrogating her. I will be transferring her to a private, specialized clinic by morning." In the bed, Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her battered ribs. She knew what the private clinic meant. It meant a place where no one could hear her cry. Since her mother, Sarah, had died in a highly suspicious boating accident that left Richard with a massive life insurance payout. The house had become a prison. Richard was a monster who smiled for the cameras and struck when the doors were locked. As Richard stepped out into the hallway to make a phone call to his private security team, a pediatric nurse named Brenda Higgins slipped into the room. Brenda had been a nurse for 20 years. She had seen Richard's type before. She gently adjusted Chloe's IV, leaning in close. "Sweetheart," Brenda whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I know he's lying. You don't have to go with him." Chloe opened her terrified blue eyes. With a trembling, uninjured hand, she reached under her thin hospital pillow. She pulled out a small, laminated business card, its edges frayed from years of being hidden in pockets and toy boxes. She shoved it into Brenda's hand. "Call him," Chloe whispered, a tear slipping down her bruised cheek. "My real daddy gave this to my mommy before he went to heaven," he said. "He said if the monsters ever came, his brothers would ride." Brenda looked at the card. It was matte black with a stark, red-winged death head logo. Below it, in bold white lettering, was a single name and a phone number: Mike Iron Henderson, President, Hells Angels, MC, Washington Charter. Brenda's breath hitched. She knew of the Hells Angels. Everyone in the city did. They were outlaws, rough men who ruled the underground. But looking into the desperate, pleading eyes of a battered 8-year-old, Brenda didn't see an outlaw biker gang. She saw Chloe's only lifeline. "Please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking. "He's going to take me away. He's going to make me disappear like Mommy." Brenda shoved the card into her scrub pocket. "I'll be right back," down the hall, hiding in a supply closet to avoid the hospital's recorded phone lines. Brenda pulled out her personal cell phone. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. It rang 3 times. "Yeah." A gravelly, deep voice answered. It sounded like a man who gargled with whiskey and broken glass. "Is this Mike Henderson?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling. "Who's asking at 2 in the morning? My name is Brenda. I'm a nurse at St. Jude's Medical Center. I have a little girl here named Chloe Holden. Her father was Jimmy Clutch Holden." Mike interrupted, the hostility in his voice instantly vanishing, replaced by a sudden, intense sharpness. "Yes," Brenda breathed out. "Her stepfather, Richard Sterling, brought her in. She's beaten badly. Mike, he says it's an accident, but he's lying. He's rich, he has the police in his pocket, and he's arranging a private transport to take her away before dawn. She gave me your card. She said you promised to protect her." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. Brenda could hear the faint sound of a jukebox playing in the background, the clinking of pool balls. Jimmy Clutch Holden had been Mike's vice president, his best friend, and a man who took a bullet meant for Mike during a bitter club rivalry 10 years ago. As Jimmy lay bleeding out on the asphalt, Mike had sworn a blood oath over his dying brother that Jimmy's wife and newborn daughter would never know a day of fear. When Sarah married the wealthy Richard Sterling years later, she had cut ties with the club, thinking she was moving into a safer, better world. The club had respected her wishes, watching from afar, but the promise remained. "Nurse Brenda," Mike's voice returned to the line. It was no longer gravelly. It was as cold and hard as a titanium blade. "What room is she in?" "Room 412, pediatric wing, 4th floor. Stall the transport. Lock her door," Mike ordered. "Tell Chloe her Uncle Mike is coming, and he's bringing the thunder." 30 miles away, at the heavily fortified Hells Angels clubhouse on the outskirts of Tacoma, the jukebox was suddenly unplugged. Mike Henderson, a mountain of a man with a graying beard, arms covered in faded ink, and a leather cut bearing the coveted president patch, stood in the center of the room. He slammed a heavy fist down on the scarred oak bar, shattering an empty beer bottle. The immediate silence in the room was deafening. 30 patched members turned to look at their president. "Saddle up!" Mike roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "Clutch's little girl is in trouble. Some rich suit is trying to put her in the ground, and the cops are turning a blind eye." The reaction was instantaneous. There were no questions, no hesitation. Jimmy Clutch Holden was a legend in the charter. A threat to his bloodline was a declaration of war against every single man wearing the winged death head. "Jax," Mike pointed to his vice president, a lean, heavily scarred man rolling a cigarette. "Get on the horn to the Portland and Spokane charters. Tell them we need bodies. Tell them we ride for clutch." "How many do we need, boss?" Jax asked, already pulling out his phone. "All of them," Mike growled, grabbing his helmet from the bar. "We're not just picking up a kid. We're sending a message to anyone who thinks they can touch our family and hide behind a bank account." Within 20 minutes, the staging area outside the clubhouse looked like an invading army. Headlights cut through the heavy Pacific Northwest rain, the air choked with the smell of high-octane fuel, exhaust, and wet leather. They came rolling in off the highway in packs of 10 and 20 brothers from neighboring chapters, answering the call in the dead of night. By the time Mike kicked his custom Harley into gear, 96 other bikes sat idling behind him in perfect, disciplined formation. 97 Hells Angels, a force of nature capable of shutting down highways and freezing the blood of the hardest criminals. Mike raised his left fist in the air, the revving of 97 V-twin engines synchronized into a deafening, chest-rattling roar. He dropped his fist, popped the clutch, and led the massive convoy onto Interstate 9. They rode like a mechanized avalanche. The local police cruisers sitting in speed traps along the highway didn't even attempt to pull them over. The officers simply watched in stunned silence as the endless column of black leather and chrome thundered past, running red lights and dominating all 4 lanes of the interstate. Back at St. Jude's Medical Center, the clock struck 3:30 a.m. Richard Sterling was pacing furiously in the hospital lobby. His private medical transport, a sleek, unmarked black ambulance, had just pulled into the loading dock. He had 2 of his own private security contractors standing by the doors. Broad-shouldered men in dark suits with concealed carry bulges under their jackets. "Get the paperwork finalized now," Richard hissed at the trembling night shift hospital administrator, Rowan Pendleton. "I am taking my daughter home. If Dr. Gallagher interferes again, I will personally ensure this hospital loses its surgical funding." Upstairs, Brenda had barricaded the door to room 412 with a heavy medical cart. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding Chloe's uninjured hand. "Are they coming?" Chloe whispered, her eyes fixed on the locked door. "They're coming, honey," Brenda said, praying she hadn't just made a terrible mistake. Suddenly, a strange vibration began to rattle the water in Chloe's plastic cup on the bedside table. It started as a low, distant hum, like the rumble of an impending earthquake. Within seconds, the hum escalated into a violent, deafening roar that shook the heavy, reinforced glass of the hospital windows. Down in the lobby, Richard stopped pacing. His security guards tensed, stepping toward the main entrance. The sliding glass doors parted, and the noise poured into the sterile lobby, echoing off the linoleum floors. Through the rain-streaked glass, Richard watched in absolute disbelief as the hospital's circular driveway filled with motorcycles. They poured in like a black tide, flooding the drop-off zones, parking on the sidewalks, and blocking the private medical transport from every possible angle. The riders killed their engines in terrifying unison. The sudden silence that followed was somehow louder than the engines had been. 97 men dismounted. They didn't draw weapons, they didn't shout, they didn't have to. The sheer physical presence of nearly 100 massive, hardened bikers clad in heavy boots, chains, and death head patches was enough to paralyze the entire hospital staff. They moved with military precision, A dozen men surrounded the black ambulance, standing shoulder to shoulder, crossing their arms, effectively trapping Richard's transport crew inside. Another 40 men formed a solid, impenetrable human wall around the hospital's exits. The front doors slid open, and Mike "Iron" Henderson walked in, flanked by Jax and 3 other massive enforcers. Water dripped from Mike's leather cut. His heavy boots thudded against the pristine floor. Richard's security guards stepped forward, hands hovering over their concealed holsters. Mike didn't even break his stride. He looked at the 2 guards, his eyes dead and hollow. "You draw on me in a hospital, son, and I promise you, 9 dozen men outside will make sure you never leave it," Mike said quietly. The guards froze. They looked outside at the sea of bikers. Slowly, carefully, they stepped aside, raising their hands in surrender. They weren't paid enough to die tonight. Richard Sterling, his face pale and his wealthy arrogance suddenly crumbling, stepped forward. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Security, call the police. These animals are trespassing." Mike stopped inches from Richard. He towered over the real estate mogul, smelling of rain, gasoline, and impending violence. "The police are already outside. Richard," Mike said, his voice a low rumble. And he was right. 5 Seattle PD cruisers had pulled up to the perimeter, but the officers were standing by their cars, severely outnumbered, watching the standoff. They know better than to interrupt family business. "Family?" Richard spat. "I don't know you." "No," Mike agreed, pulling off his leather gloves. "But you know my niece, Chloe Holden, and I hear you've been putting your hands on her." Richard's eyes widened in realization. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his tailored armor. You have no right." Mike leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for the monster in the suit. "I made a promise to a dead man, and tonight, I'm here to collect. Jax, secure the lobby. Nobody goes up. Nobody goes out." Mike walked past a terrified Richard, heading straight for the elevators. It was time to get his girl. The elevator doors on the 4th floor slid open with a soft, cheerful chime that felt obscenely out of place. Mike "Iron" Henderson stepped into the pediatric ward, followed by 3 of his most trusted brothers, Grizzly Adams, a man whose beard and bulk earned him his moniker, Tommy Shiv Rossi, and a quiet, terrifyingly calm man known only as Preacher. The 4th floor was a stark contrast to the chaotic standoff in the lobby. Here, the air smelled of baby powder, rubbing alcohol, and suppressed anxiety, as the 4 massive, leather-clad outlaws moved down the corridor. The heavy thud of their steel-toed boots echoed like a countdown. Nurses and orderlies froze, pressing themselves against the pale yellow walls. They had seen the news. They knew the reputation of the Death Head Patch. Mike didn't look at them. His eyes, cold and focused, tracked the room numbers. 408, 410, 412. Outside, room 412. Dr. Aris Gallagher stood with his arms crossed, flanked by 2 hospital security guards who looked like they would rather be anywhere else on Earth. Gallagher's stethoscope hung around his neck, and despite the trembling of his hands, he held his ground. "That's far enough." "Doctor," Gallagher said, his voice cracking slightly, but maintaining a tone of professional authority. "This is a restricted ward. You cannot be here." Mike stopped. He looked down at the doctor, towering over him by nearly a foot. The fluorescent lights caught the silver of the chains draped across Mike's cut. "I have no quarrel with you, Doc," Mike said. his voice a low, rumbling baritone that vibrated in the chest of everyone standing nearby. "I know you were just doing your job. In fact, I respect you for trying to keep that snake downstairs away from her. But right now, you need to step aside." "She is my patient," Gallagher insisted, though he took a half-step back. "Her legal guardian is downstairs. If you take her, it's kidnapping. I will not let you traumatize this child further." Mike's expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. "Doc, the only trauma that little girl is facing is the man holding her leash. Jimmy Holden was her father. He was my brother. He bled out in my arms, and I made a promise to God and to him that I would keep his blood safe. I am not leaving this hospital without her. Now, you can step aside, or Grizzly can move you aside. But we are going through that door." Before Gallagher could respond, a muffled, panicked scraping sound came from inside the room. Someone was dragging something heavy away from the door. The handle clicked. The door opened a few inches, revealing the terrified, tear-streaked face of Nurse Brenda Higgins. She looked at Mike, her eyes darting to the patches on his chest, then down to the battered face of the little girl hiding behind her legs. Mike dropped to one knee. The sudden movement made the security guards flinch, but Mike ignored them. He ignored the doctor, the nurses, and the hospital protocols. His entire world narrowed down to the 8-year-old girl clutching an IV pole, her right eye swollen shut, her left arm wrapped in stark white plaster. Chloe peeked out from behind Brenda's scrubs. She looked at the giant man with the graying beard, the tattoos creeping up his neck, and the leather vest. "Uncle Mike," she whispered, her voice so fragile it sounded like it might break in the air. "Yeah, baby girl, it's me," Mike choked out, the iron-hard exterior of the biker president cracking instantly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded, silver pocket watch. It had a deeply engraved eagle on the front. "Your daddy gave me this. Told me to hold on to it until you were old enough." Chloe's good eye widened. She let go of Brenda's leg and took a step forward, her bare feet padding softly on the cold linoleum. She didn't see an outlaw. She didn't see a criminal. She saw the man from the stories her mother used to whisper to her when Richard wasn't home, the stories of knights in roaring armor who watched over her from afar. She threw her good arm around Mike's massive, leather-clad neck and buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. Mike wrapped his arms around her tiny frame, terrified he might break her if he squeezed too hard. He closed his eyes, absorbing the agonizing sound of her cries, and a cold, lethal fury settled into his bones. He looked up at Brenda. "You did good. Brenda, you saved her life tonight," Mike said softly. He unclasped the heavy, fleece-lined leather jacket he wore under his cut and wrapped it around Chloe, engulfing her in warmth and the scent of the open road. Doctor Gallagher, watching the interaction, slowly lowered his defensive posture. He saw the way the child clung to the biker not with fear, but with desperate, absolute relief. He looked at the bruises on her face, then back at Mike. Her arm is set, but she has a severe concussion and 3 fractured ribs. "Doctor," Gallagher said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She needs rest. She needs specialized care. She'll get the best doctor's money can buy. Doc, our money. On our turf," Mike promised, standing up with Chloe securely cradled in his arms. She weighed practically nothing. "The police are outside," Gallagher warned. "You'll never make it past the state lines with a child. It's an Amber Alert waiting to happen. Richard Sterling has judges on his payroll. A dark, terrifying smile spread across Mike's face. Let Richard try to call his judges. Tonight, the only law in Seattle is the charter. The elevator ride lasted only 2 minutes, but for Richard Sterling, waiting below, it stretched into something unbearable. The lobby had been transformed, sealed off, silent, and lined with rows of unmoving bikers. Outside, rain hammered against nearly 100 Harley-Davidsons, their chrome flashing under harsh security lights. Police cars surrounded the building, yet none dared move in. When the elevator doors opened, all attention snapped forward. Mike stepped out first, steady and unhurried. Chloe cradled safely in his arms, wrapped in leather, her face hidden against his chest. She was shielded from the chaos. Behind him, his men formed a tight barrier, closing ranks as they advanced. The moment Richard saw her, restraint shattered. He surged forward, shouting, demanding she be returned, but he didn't get far. 2 bikers blocked him effortlessly, stopping him cold without lifting a hand. Mike approached, stopping just short of him. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried. You never owned her. Richard tried to recover, clinging to authority custody, law, police waiting outside. But before he could finish, another voice cut in. The crowd parted. A sharply dressed man stepped forward, briefcase in hand, calm and precise. Beside him stood a detective. Richard knew all too well. The color drained from his face. The briefcase snapped open. A thick folder hit the desk. Everything was about to change. Detective Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Funny thing about offshore bank accounts, Mr. Sterling. You think they're invisible, but the Hells Angels have friends in very dark, very deep corners of the web. An hour ago, an anonymous source emailed my captain a complete ledger. It shows a wire transfer of $250,000 from your Cayman account to the marine mechanic who serviced your wife's boat 3 days before it sank. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The illusion of his power, his wealth, and his untouchable status evaporated in the span of 30 seconds. We also received a forwarded voicemail, Miller added, his eyes narrowing with disgust. Sarah left it on a burner phone just hours before she died, stating she had found your embezzled funds and was going to the FBI. The audio has been verified. Mike adjusted his hold on Chloe, pressing her closer to his chest. You thought you were a predator, Richard. You thought you were the biggest monster in the room because you could hit women and children behind closed doors. But you forgot that out here in the real world. There are monsters who hunt other monsters. Richard looked at his private security guards, his eyes pleading. Do something, I pay you. Shoot them. The guards looked at the 97 Hells Angels in the lobby. They looked at Detective Miller holding the handcuffs. Very slowly, both guards unclipped their holsters, placed their weapons on the hospital reception desk, and raised their hands in the air, backing away. Richard Sterling, Detective Miller said, grabbing Richard roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around. You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Holden Sterling, embezzlement, and child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. As the cold steel cuffs clicked around Richard's wrists, he let out a pathetic, broken sob. The untouchable billionaire was reduced to a weeping coward in the center of St. Jude's lobby. Mike didn't stay to watch him get dragged away. He turned on his heel and walked toward the sliding glass doors. The massive crowd of bikers parted again, creating a pathway of respect for their president and the little girl in his arms. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The thick clouds broke, allowing a sliver of pale moonlight to hit the wet asphalt. The police cruisers had their lights flashing, but the officers stood down, watching in awe as the massive biker gang reclaimed the night. Mike walked over to his custom Harley. Jax had already attached the armored sidecar they used for club rallies. It was lined with thick blankets. Mike gently lowered Chloe into the sidecar, making sure her cast was supported. He wrapped his heavy leather cut entirely around her, the winged death head logo resting proudly over her chest like a shield. He grabbed a small, customized helmet painted with pink flames, a gift Clutch had commissioned before he died, and slid it carefully over her head. "Are we going home, Uncle Mike?" Chloe asked, looking up at him, her good eye reflecting the moonlight. Mike smiled, a genuine, warm smile that cracked the hardened lines of his face. He reached out and wiped a stray tear from her unbruised cheek. "Yeah, kiddo," Mike said softly. "We're going home. You've got 97 uncles waiting to teach you how to ride, how to throw a punch, and how to never, ever be afraid of the dark again." Mike swung his heavy leg over the bike and settled into the leather seat. He looked back at his men. 97 outlaws, misfits, and ghosts of the highway, all waiting for the signal. Mike raised his left fist high into the night air. 97 V-twin engines roared to life simultaneously, a mechanical symphony of thunder and fire that shook the very foundations of the hospital. It wasn't just noise, it was a declaration. It was a promise kept. Mike dropped his fist, kicked the bike into gear, and peeled out of the hospital driveway. Behind him, the massive black tide of the Hells Angels followed in perfect formation, their tail lights glowing like dying embers as they disappeared down the interstate, carrying the daughter of Jimmy Clutch, Holden, into the safety of the wind. The monsters had come, but they hadn't come for Chloe. They had come to save her. If this story of ultimate protection and found family moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to honor the bikers who stepped up when the system failed. Share this video with your friends to spread the incredible true spirit of brotherhood. And subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life stories where the unexpected heroes save the day. Ride safe